Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Rockpile Podcast, where stories of resilience, strength, and life's toughest challenges come to light tonight. We're tackling one of the most important conversations in sports and beyond. We're going to tackle mental health tonight. In tonight's episode, I'm joined by experts who are making a difference in the world of mental health. I had the panel on prior to coming live, and normally most who know me from the Mohawk Valley Sports Watch or the Rockpile. Usually I don't get nervous on a podcast, but tonight I was a little bit nervous only because I know the importance of this topic and it's very close to all of us. So when I bring the panel on, we're going to dive right into it. If you're following on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, if you're on Spotify, Apple Music, if you have any questions for the group tonight, I will do the best I can to pull as many questions over as I can, and we'll try to get the panel to answer as many as we can tonight so you can interact with us. I want to make sure I give a special shout out to Birch Wealth Management, Movement Mortgage, and Accelerate Sports for jumping up tonight to help sponsor the podcast. And I want to also give a special shout out to Colgate University and Quinn for helping make this happen tonight. I can't thank Colgate University enough for helping me over the years and really partnering with the Rockpile. So without further ado, let's bring on the panel as we speak. Let's see if we can do this here. I'm glad, Shannon, you're not in the front line as you were earlier. So welcome, everybody. I appreciate you guys taking the time tonight.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
no problem at all. So before we get into it, I did share, Christy, I shared yours, and Dawn, I shared your bios with the audience prior to coming on tonight. But if we can just kind of go around the horn, say a little bit about yourself before we dive into a lot of topics tonight, that'd be great. So, Dawn, why don't we start with yourself?
Sure. Happy to jump in first. I'm Dawn LaFrance. My pronouns are she, hers, and I am a psychologist who works at Colgate. I've been at Colgate University for 23 years, a real long time. I plan to be there for the next, maybe not 23 years, but quite a while. I love working with student athletes. I was a student athlete myself, grew up in high school, playing a lot of sports, and then kind of focused in on track and field as a college student athlete, but activity in general is important to me. I think it's important to have good exercise as part of a healthy lifestyle. So I'm really happy to be here, and mental health is really close to home for me. So want to make sure that we help people navigate through these sometimes difficult waters.
And Christy, we'll go to you next.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I'm Christy Reed. I'm a mental health counselor at Colgate. I'm also pursuing a doctoral degree right now in sport and performance psychology. Prior to getting into this field, I was a high school athlete, playing volleyball, played field hockey for a little while, a whole variety of things. And my big thing, though, was dancing competitively. I went to college for dance, studied exercise science there, went into the fitness industry, danced professionally for a while. Happy to say I grew up in the Mohawk Valley, so very close to my heart, and came back here to kind of give back to the community in that way. And so at Colgate, I've been working with our student athletes quite a bit. I'm the liaison to mental health services for the student athletes. So really lucky to get to work really close with the coaches and the teams.
Awesome. And Shannon, you can give a quick one on yourself, even though most of our audience knows who you are, but go ahead and give one on yourself.
Okay. I guess the biggest thing with me is I've been a varsity field hockey coach for going on 25 years. I also coach track as the assistant. That's a newer gig for me. I think I've been doing it now for about 5 years. But sports are definitely something that I'm extremely passionate about. I played field hockey at Central Michigan at the D1 level. I've been a special ed teacher for 25 years, and I have 2 kids. I have Michael that's 22, and he works at the Oneida County building. He does property taxes, and I have a daughter that's going to be 19 coming up, and she's actually a Division I athlete at Lemoyne playing soccer as their goalie.
Great.
Nice.
So I won't bore you with me, but I'm the vice president of operations for Bernie Bus here locally in Rome. I was a head football coach at Sequoia High School. I was an assistant football coach under my dad at Waterville High School for a while. And then I am now coaching in the Rome City School District. I coached the modified level this past year. And I'm a former Division I athlete. I played football at Fordham. So sports has been huge. My sister and I grew up. My dad had coached varsity football for over 30 years. So we're a sports family, which is another reason why this is so near and dear to both of us. So we've dealt with the high school athletes, and we've been involved in the college level. So I'm really excited to get started. So I appreciate you guys again for taking the time. So why don't we dive into it? And the first topic that I just want to get to is some of the common mental health disorders in athletes. And one of the ones that I just wanted to start with, because we see it all the time, is depression. And I see it all the time with a lot of the athletes that they're not motivated. Whether it's some of the young athletes that are the night owls that are up late at night, they're not getting a proper sleep, and maybe they have all the pressure of the academics in school. Maybe they're not doing well in school. But if you guys can talk to us a little bit about the depression part, because that was one that stood out to me.
Yeah, depression is something that a lot of people suffer from, not just student athletes, but across the board. I would like to just emphasize how prevalent seasonal affective disorder is in this area, especially after a pretty tough week of storms and darkness. That I think depression for some people come in a seasonal way too. So we might see it a little bit more, or quite a bit more, in the winter. That's not the case for everybody, but certainly we see this in our teens and into the college years for sure. One of the top disorders that we work with at Colgate, anxiety being the highest, but certainly depression and mood disorders being right up there. There's lots of good strategies to help people. Unfortunately, not everybody asks for help or even knows what it is. In teenagers, it sometimes looks a little bit different than it does in adults. Teenagers might be more irritable, or like you said, have some sleep issues or weight fluctuations, or, motivation issues. And some of that you might see in adults, but the irritability is often more prominent in teens than you'll see later on. So not everybody picks up on it as quickly with teenagers as they might with older folks too.
Christy, one of the things I wanted to bring up as we're talking about some of the common ones. I was also looking at some of the eating disorders, and there's like with athletes, there's, I know like swimmers or track and field athletes, you get into these certain exercise, we're pretty structured, right? Athletes are pretty structured. They have a schedule. At the Division I or even Division II and III, you have a set schedule of when you're going to eat during the day. What type of food are you going to eat? So diets, different exercise regimes and stuff like that. Can you talk to us a little bit about that part?
Yeah, eating issues can be really, really complex, and they can have all sorts of causes and effects on the athletes, and can be, pretty dangerous and pretty scary for when it comes to someone who's incredibly active. You mentioned some sports that are just inherently maybe a little more outward physical focused in the sense of body shape and size, or have historically been, or in mainstream media are, and that adds this other layer of sort of pressure, or even preoccupation with just sort of like what my body feels or looks like. So it's really important to be continuing to like break some of that stigma and enforcing those healthy habits for athletes when it comes to providing education on just eating healthy, building strong bodies, and, taking care of themselves. Yeah.
And Shane, as a coach, I mean, even at the high school level, I mean, I'm sure you see this with athletes today in the years that you were coaching. Talk to us a little bit about that if you can.
Yeah. So as the girls were just talking, it just made me think of a lot of different things. I mean, I can even think back to when I was in college, and that was a long time ago. But we had several teammates that, battled eating disorders, and then, didn't necessarily have that energy to play. And even at the high school level, I see it a lot. And, the one thing I was thinking of too is I did coach a year. I was the assistant wrestling girls coach. And I got to be honest with you, I really struggled with that. Because obviously we know with boys wrestling, cutting weight is one thing for a boy, but I struggled because here I am coaching field hockey where, I talk about, you got to eat, you got to fuel your body, you got to be strong. But then you get in the world of wrestling when you're close to that weight and now you have to cut weight. And, for females, you start to get into that cutting weight thing, it can affect your menstrual cycle. I mean, there's so many different things. So it's definitely something that's out there, and just the whole at the high school level, the body image is so big. And, I always tell my players, strong is the new skinny. Like, you want to have an athletic body. You want to have, those thicker muscular thighs, and, because that's what's going to make you a powerful athlete. But, in the eyes of a teenager, they want to be that body image that you see, on TikTok and magazines, that nice thin physique. But as an athlete, that may not be the best thing.
The other thing that's happening for these high school student athletes is they're going through puberty, and all the hormone shifts and all that stuff can certainly affect mental health issues. But I think about body image and eating disorders specifically, and it's important for people to gain weight, and people gain weight at different times. Some people might gain weight at 14, another person waits till they're 17. And we see this at the college level. No one wants to gain the freshman 15, but it actually might be really appropriate for somebody too, because that's the time in their life when their body's supposed to do that. So if they're used to having a certain body type, let's say, they still have the same body type, but I guess a certain weight, and then it changes because it's kind of naturally supposed to. I think there's some pushback sometimes, and even coaches or others might comment negatively. And we really try to get our education out there about the myths surrounding body image and eating issues on campus, and really what it takes to fuel a healthy body.
And recognizing that even though there are definitely some sports where maybe it's more prevalent or talked about or known about a little bit more, ones that are doing weigh-ins and those sorts of things, that we're seeing it across all sports, all genders, and identifying backgrounds and demographics. So it's important to remain sort of like open-minded when it comes to sometimes it's not the people you'd suspect too, who are struggling with some of that on their own.
One of the ones that was really common when I was in college, and it was many years ago, was substance abuse. And when I say substance abuse, I mean, listen, as athletes, you get injuries and you don't want to get hurt, because if you get hurt, you're going to miss time, right? And if somebody takes your place, they play well, you may have lost your spot. So when I was in school, we dealt with, painkillers was huge, steroids. But when I was playing, and I think it's still today at that level, was we got randomly drug tested. And it was always funny because I was one that always got drug tested, and I didn't use anything. And then the guys that I knew were using stuff never got drug tested. But the painkillers, and I think the nervousness in an athlete to say, if I get hurt, there's a good chance that I may lose my spot. And that extra stress, that extra strain on any athlete to be out on that field is another burden to a young athlete.
It's a lot of pressure for sure for the student athletes. I think of some of the things that are certainly substances, but not illegal substances. But I even think about like caffeinated power drinks that people use before practices sometimes. And if those aren't used in a healthy way, then those can be pretty bad for you too. So I think sometimes students aren't aware of how all these different substances that they're kind of thrown in their body affect them. And each student's different too, or each athlete is different. So what one person might be able to tolerate, another person can't. So we hear that a lot about alcohol use, for instance. If it's, well, my friends all drink like this and they're fine, and they actually do really well in school and really well in their sport. It doesn't mean across the board that that's the case though. So I think sometimes people compare themselves to others in a way that is really unhealthy and can make them even sicker sometimes.
Another important one was, and I was a guy that to this day, I'm a night owl. Like I can't go to bed at 8:00. My mind is always thinking. And to this day, I always say to myself is, again, the pressure on athletes to compete, to train at a high level, it becomes your everyday routine. And if you don't get enough sleep, your body's tired, which your body gets tired, that leads to injuries. And a lot of athletes have that schedule where you're working out early in the morning, then you go to class, you go to team meetings, positional meetings, more training, team dinners and all that. But the lack of sleep plays a huge role in this too, right?
It's huge. Yeah.
Mhm.
I think, I think about when we have athletes or any students really coming in and they're struggling, they're overwhelmed, they're really stressed. They're at the point where they're like, I don't know what to do. It's like, let's check in with the basics. Like, what is going on with your sleep? What's going on with your eating? Like, just checking in on those basic things. Because when some of those core elements start to misalign and we're neglecting sleep, we're neglecting good diet, you start to see mental health struggles starting to emerge more than even just regulating emotions. Tends to be something that really shows up, being more angry, being more crying more easily, having no interest in the things that they're doing. That's the kind of thing, like sleep really has such a huge impact on the way our bodies recover, our minds recover. Yeah, so important.
Yeah, I think it's so important for coaches and parents to be checking in with the high school kids or even the college athletes to see what their sleep schedule is, because I don't know that everybody realizes just how important it is for recovery too. Or people who are sleep deprived are more likely just to get sick more often, so some of those kinds of things can really have an impact. But as you dive in there with some students, you realize, oh my gosh, they're playing video games so late at night, and then they're struggling the next day. And people get into these things. I think, some people scroll through their phones until really late at night, or have a long distance relationship and they're on the phone with somebody. Mm-hmm. So like just asking that question to open it up so that we can educate people about how important sleep is. Because I think it's one of those things that's just it's like taken for granted sometimes. And people don't realize just how much it helps them in their sport if they're well rested. And we have a couple wonderful faculty members who join us each semester with our coaches to talk about how important sleep is. And they have good studies. So they have data to show the differences in the athletes who are getting a good amount of sleep versus those who are more sleep deprived. So that always helps to have some data to back up what we're sharing.
Yeah, I was always that person. I still am today. Like, even when I lay in bed at night, my mind doesn't shut off. And I've tried over the years to shut it off and say, you have to get some sleep. You have to get to sleep. Tomorrow's another day. You can't do it all in one day. But I even went back when I was an athlete. That's how I was when I was an athlete. I couldn't sleep at night because I was so worried about, am I going to be late for my team study hall? Am I going to be late for my meeting? Is my alarm clock going to go off? And what do I do on this play? If coach calls this defense, what am I doing? And I got so obsessive that I didn't get the sleep that I need. I would probably say, even to this day, I probably get 5-6 hours of sleep. And I know that's not enough sleep, but that's just how I was. And I tried, and I know that's how a lot of athletes are.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
I was even going to say, Rock, as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking of my own daughter, Michaela. Like I said earlier, she's a Division I athlete at Le Moyne, soccer player. And, she holds herself with very high standards, to maintain super high grades. And then now you take in balancing, traveling, missing classes and all of that. And, I'll message her, and sometimes she's up to all hours of the night, needing to study. And I'm like, you cannot do that. You got to, maintain that sleep schedule. And a lot of the time she's like, well, I have the weekend to catch up on sleep. And it's like, if like you said earlier, if you're sleep deprived, that's not good, because you can get injured that way. You can get sick that way. And, a lot of college athletes, whether you play Division I, II, or III, I mean, their schedule during their main season is hectic with traveling. So being sick during a season is not a good thing, but it definitely happens where that sleep is just non-existent, especially I feel like in the college world of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think sometimes it's the accumulation of it too. Like all of us on the screen can probably get away with a night or two of bad sleep, and function okay. It's like when that keeps going though, and then they don't kind of swing back. So what I do tell people that if, once in a while you need that, never pull an all-nighter. I think those are horrible all around. But if you need like not very much sleep for a night or two, even, where are you going to get that? Where are you going to get that? And when are you going to rest? Because we all need rest, and we all need rest in different ways too. Because if you just keep going and going and going and turning to maybe caffeine to keep you going even more, it's going to catch up to you. And unfortunately, sometimes it catches up at the worst time, like before playoff season or something like that, or before midterms. So to be able to sort of approach a school year or a semester or a season as like more of a marathon than a sprint, I think is really important to think about the long road. and to do all we can to keep healthy for that long period of time.
You know, we talk a lot. Oh,
I
Shane,
was
go
going
ahead.
to say, sorry, Rock. Do you guys have any strategies? I mean, that you tell, your student athletes about, because I feel like, again, in the college world, like Rock, you mentioned it, going to sleep and your mind is, going a mile a minute.
Mhm.
You guys have any strategies that you tell those college athletes on ways to help them, actually sleep and shut their brain off?
Yeah, I mean, I think we could definitely go into, like really, I feel like about baseline is sort of like, what is your environment like? Are there any environmental factors that are interrupting? Are we too hot? Is it too loud? Is it, this or that? So I always like check in on those kind of basic things. I really, for like a busy mind, someone who's like, I just can't shut it off. I really love some sort of strategy that's going to actually occupy the mind for a little bit. But in a way that's encouraging relaxation. So progressive muscle relaxation is one of my favorites. I think it works really well for athletes because it's making them kind of listen to their bodies too. So it's doing a really basic scan of their whole body from top to bottom, trying to kind of tense and relax their muscles piece by piece. And if they get to their toes and they're not asleep yet, start back at the top, go slower, focus on parts you haven't felt yet, and being really thoughtful and thorough, because it helps the mind not jump all around sometimes, and it gives them something to focus on.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And having a bedtime routine is important. It's important to young kids. It's also important to adults. So if somebody's like going, and then, taking a shower and going into bed and hoping to fall asleep right away, they're just not going to be able to most times because their mind's still active. So I love what Christy just said about maybe incorporating something like that into their routine, not, scrolling through TikTok right before they try to go to sleep because it's so busy and stimulating, not playing a video game. If they're able to read a book for leisure, I know that that's a privilege for college students to have the time to do that, but even a chapter so that they're not going from biology to trying to sleep, but something that's more enjoyable. Sometimes, some decaffeinated tea will help, some kind of routine really to get people in the mindset to go to sleep. It's also important to remind students not to study in bed because you have to associate bed with sleeping instead of like, this is the place that is stressful for me.
Yep.
So thinking about some of those things is really important too. And it can take some time for people to go from a mile a minute to that. I mean, it takes a lot to be a student athlete, in the college environment. And I'm sure like your daughter, she's going. She's got a lot going on in her mind and a lot's going on tomorrow that she needs to mentally prepare for. But it's also not doing her any good to let that keep going at night. So to put that away somehow and turn towards what needs to happen for sleep. I also tell students it's better to get rest than no rest at all. So to take off that pressure, because one of the things that keeps us all awake the most is when we're stressing about sleep. So we're laying there saying, oh my gosh, now I'm down to 5 hours of sleep. Tomorrow's gonna be awful. Oh my gosh, 5 more minutes went by. I'm staring at the clock. It's better to remind yourself, it's better just to rest here and get into kind of a meditative state, pretend you're on the beach. And that's better than not, because the more we're doing that internal pressure, the more we're going to stay up. We've all had those nights, but most of them are full of the anxiety about the next day. So figuring out what to do with that too.
What about the way, and we talk about this on a lot of my shows, on the sports shows, is we talk about like back in the day when my sister were younger, there was a lot of 3-sport athletes that were out there. And now you look at it today and there's a lot of indoor sports complexes where, kids can focus on basketball all year. My daughter's busy with soccer most of the year. We encourage, multiple sports. And I feel like that's an extra pressure on a lot of the young kids today because it's like, well, if I don't do basketball all year, I know Joey, who's playing a lot of basketball, come basketball season, is going to get better. And I feel like that's an extra stress too. Do you guys have any thoughts on the 3-sport athletes versus, focusing on the one sport and the extra tension that causes?
I have a lot of thoughts, but I got to say a lot of them are anecdotal and not data driven. So I have 2 kids. One's a senior in high school. The other one's off at college playing football. They've played a bunch of sports, but there's times when we've sort of had the, some of it's the pressure of, I remember one April, Chloe had to go to 3 sports every week, and it was insane. And at the end of the month, I was like, what are we doing right now? But if we missed anything, those coaches were upset, and they'd let us know that she needs to be dedicated to basketball. Well, tomorrow's soccer though. So and it's really hard to choose. And the way that recruiters are recruiting now, it's often through clubs, and it's not through high school sports anymore. So I think it depends on the long-term goal of the student and what they want versus what their parents want. So I've also known a lot of high school students who, by the time they get to senior year, they are so done with sports because they have been driven by everyone else. And it was almost like they should keep playing rather than they wanted to. So I have a lot of this, it all depends on that kid, I think, and also the system they have around them to get to places. I mean, for some kids, it's their social life doing all these sports. So it's actually a really good thing. They love it. And what would they be doing without it? But I think sometimes we're pushing our kids to do way too many things, or too long. And I hear about injuries for those students who play one sport all year because they're not developing the other muscles that they might develop with a different sport, So I think it's about having conversations with a kid, allowing for flexibility, trying not to, I talk about vicarious parenting, trying not to get all of your awards and all that stuff through your kids, but let them be their own person rather than parents deciding for them what they're going to do, or coaches who see some skill. It doesn't necessarily mean that skilled kid wants to do that sport the rest of their life either. So I think listening, checking in, and being open to what that person wants to do.
Yeah, I think burnout is just really prevalent in athletes in general, but athletes who are maybe not getting a lot of variety, if they are getting a lot of the same sport all year round, right? Like off season, it serves an actually really important purpose developmentally. And so does preseason, and so does in season. So letting those natural phases happen is really important, and looking for those signs of like a sign of burnout in an athlete, not just fatigue and injury and illness and those sorts of things, but just being disinterested or being kind of grumpy around their sport and those sorts of things might be little signals of like, okay, let's have some of those hard conversations.
Can any of the mental health to contribute to like childhood? I think about the way my sister and I were raised. Like, we grew up with a dad that was a coach, worked hard. My mom worked hard, and we were very structured at a really young age. So like when my sister and I got through high school, we both played multiple sports, but then it's almost like we were ready for what college brought, because we didn't know anything else. We didn't know, we were so A to Z, every day, a daily routine, and a dad that was, I don't want to say he was really tough on us, but he was a coach. So we kind of lived a different lifestyle. Is any of that how kids were raised at a young age? Does any of that contribute to any of the mental health as we get older?
Yes, certainly. How people are raised. I was thinking of the overlap between biology and environment. And, some people are wired to have anxiety. No matter what family they were raised in, they're going to be anxious because that's their genetics. Other people maybe don't have that, but they were brought up in just a high pressure cooker situation, and they develop anxiety. So I think that it's both, and it depends on a lot of factors. I think also when you have a sibling going through the same thing, then you have somebody else that's in it with you, then that can be different than, an only child that's getting all the pressure from both parents on them. So definitely childhood can affect later life. It affects the way that we interact with each other, the patterns that we develop. And I think our work ethic in general starts pretty young. It can certainly change throughout our lives, but I think a lot of that starts at a young age. And if you're taught to juggle multiple demands, then you learn to do that, and that becomes normal. That actually not doing that might feel like you're doing something wrong because that's what's normal for you.
Yeah, and the next thing I brought up here is some of the factors that influence mental health. And one of the things that I had written down here was personality. And again, for athletes, again, you're goal setters. You're hard workers, you're persistent. Again, I bring up the structure And at times that can get overwhelming at times. So I think a lot of it can cause high anxiety, the different levels, the different training regimens, but does personality factor into this as well?
Most definitely. I see.
Yeah, I
I
think
see
so.
Christy nodding too,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, I think personality and, you know, even as far as if you're more extroverted or introverted could have, you know, a implication on this. You know, if you're somebody that is real extroverted, wants to be around a team quite a bit, then it might be really different to be, you know, going from club sport to varsity sport back to club again versus somebody who needs more downtime and is more introverted. So, or might even appreciate a sport like track more if they're not
Yep.
as extroverted, depending on that. So that's just one part of personality, but I do think that all of the different parts can relate to one another. I think even as far as how much somebody's competitive drive is and why they're motivated to win, can depend on personality and also upbringing.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I'll throw this question out there, and then anybody can jump in on this, but mental health doesn't have any, as far as gender goes. You know, I was doing some research, and again, anybody can jump in here, but a study, and I'm just going to read the number here. It says back in 2022, female athletes experienced more mental exhaustion, sadness, and anxiety, and the suicide rates were higher in female athletes over recent years. So gender.
Yeah, I would say a lot of the studies that are out there right now, and I have I've talked a lot about the NCAA's well-being study that was it was around 20, it might have been 2022, 2023. Definitely higher rates of women, BIPOC and LGBTQIA athletes reporting higher levels of mental health concerns, issues. I would say that is sort of across the board in a lot of the studies, but some actually have shown that some male athletes have shown higher rates of suicidal thoughts or reporting suicidal behaviors, that sort of thing. So there will be some differing ones out there as you search. But, you know, it's a lot of it is sort of self-reporting too. So I think there's something there to check in when it comes to stigma and athletes who are more comfortable sort of reporting having mental health issues. And there are some sort of gender-based stigmas, I think, sometimes that could potentially skew some of that data. We know that women tend to be have higher rates of like help seeking. So going to use counseling services and those sorts of things.
Yeah, and another one that's pretty close too, and I won't say we did this at Fordham, but hazing, right? Alcohol comes into play. I know there's different forms of hazing that are out there, but if you guys can talk to us a little bit about that part and how that affects us.
Yeah, hazing reminds me of bullying. So at the high school level, it might be more thought of as even bullying, but the pressure from peers to do things that we know aren't good for us, all so that people can fit in. And you want to fit in. If you're a first year student at a college, you want to fit in with your group. So we keep a pretty close eye on hazing. Certainly you can't catch it all because a lot of it is done, of course, behind closed doors and in secret. And then even the person who gets hazed often doesn't want to report it because of either retaliation or just feeling like they're going to get pushed out of the group. So it can be horrible for people's mental health because they might be trying to fake that they're doing fine versus knowing that they're being hazed at the same time. So, but it does remind me a lot of bullying and just knowing that you're going to be treated a certain way by a certain group of people time and time again. It doesn't feel good. It's not good for people's self-esteem, for their ego and all the things that you need in order to show up and compete well. It kind of goes against that. So if people want a good team, it's, you know, if the older people on a team want to pull in the underclass students and have a really good, strong team, hazing is not the way to do it. Maybe go do some team builders, like, you know, do a Habitat for Humanity house together or something like that, where it's hard work and you're all doing things together. But the hazing isn't gonna do that. It's actually gonna make people not trust each other.
Yeah, it's damaging to group cohesion, to team culture. It's sort of does the opposite of what I think sometimes athletes might expect it to do.
One of the ones I was thinking about is again, I'm talking years and years ago. We didn't have all this social media, right? We wouldn't be probably doing something like this right now online. But now you throw in the cyberbullying where you have Facebook, you have TikTok, Twitter, LinkedIn. I mean, you name it, Instagram. And I feel like now, like even my son, like I go upstairs and my son's on Snapchat, and I'm like, let me see your phone. What are you doing on Snapchat? And you can see more. These kids, I feel like, know more today than what we did years ago. But talk to us a little bit about social media, how that affects us at any age, right? At all levels.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of the some of the emerging studies, and I will say, like, especially when it comes to athletes, it's pretty young in the sense of like what kind of research is out there and what sort of studies have been done about the impact of social media. It in general, across the board, has shown higher usage of social media or social networking sites in a day will have damaging effects on mental health. So that's sort of the correlation that has been found research-wise. But I think what I know Dawn is probably thinking as we're talking about this is how we've just seen such an increase in social anxiety. And I think it'd be really hard to not just sort of point at social media as a factor that might be causing just this rise in social anxiety in young people. Everything's out there, everyone's reachable, sharing locations, seeing people get kind of canceled online, like those sorts of things really create an environment of sort of threat. It also can be a really positive, helpful way to connect and show off, parts of yourself that you're proud of, express your identity when it comes to being an athlete. Even we see with the media right now, right? Like it's how athletes are supporting themselves financially with sponsorship deals. So that's why it's tricky, is because we're both seeing higher rates causing mental health, maybe being connected to mental health issues, but then also athletes really wanting to rely on it for getting recruited or for finances or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I feel like the other one that I wanted to bring up here, and this was probably should have been brought up earlier, was compulsive disorder. So as we're talking, like I'm thinking about if Facebook goes down or any social media platform goes down, you actually see people get into a state of panic because they're so used to, like, the first thing in the morning, what's everybody do? I'm guilty of it. I pick up my cell phone. But I'm thinking more of, again, when I was in school, we had guys they had rituals. So they had game day rituals. I was one of them. I had to make sure that I got on the field at a certain time. I had to make sure I walked the field a certain way every time, or my socks were a certain way. And I'm just thinking of that. People had their routines, whether it was in practice or games, and they got so obsessed with it that affected them mentally. Can you guys talk to us at all about any of that type of stuff? Any of those? I'm guessing it's a compulsive disorder. Is that what they would call that?
Well, some of it's in a normal range, right? So some people like certain socks on game day. Absolutely. When my daughter has a basketball game, I wear green that day. I still do that at my age, so some of it's within a normal range. But I think what we look at is when it becomes disabling in some place, like it hurts them somehow. So whether it's time, so to walk the field a certain way 3 times while your coach is saying, you got to be in the huddle now, that's a problem, right? Or if there's some other kind of ritual that just takes a lot of time. So we see this, I see it kind of in a continuum, actually. And obsessive compulsive disorder is the disorder that goes with what you're talking about if it is debilitating in some way. And then we help people try to figure out which ones are needed and why are you thinking you need them. So there's usually a magical thinking component that if I don't do X, Y, and Z in this order, something terrible is going to happen. I'm going to lose the game, or I'm going to have a fumble, or whatever the case is. And to have people actually experiment with, let's try not to do that or alter this in some way and see if it actually has a consequence you think. And then can you tolerate it? And it wasn't really your fault if the game lost or because you didn't wear those socks that day. So I think it's all looking at, like, some of it feels a little functional to me in some ways because you get on your game face if you do certain things. Some people like a certain song and they get up and they get ready. I think that's great. But if they have to have 5 songs in the same order And then if somebody, loses a song for some reason and it throws them completely into shock, that's when it's a problem. So I think that we're always looking at like, at what point is this problematic and in what ways? And then can we motivate them to change it if it is problematic?
Yeah, Dawn, well, first I'm having visions of if you were watching the Commanders, the kicker who went through some of his, you saw some of his OCD presented pretty clear on TV. I think it was 2 weekends ago. And most likely, and I don't know this, but having OCD, it's going to emerge in other parts in this person's life too, most likely. But Dawn talking about some of these routines, when I have an athlete who's dealing with a lot of pre-performance anxiety, having some good solid routines before they go to perform can be really helpful for anxiety. But if it's so rigid that it's causing a lot of distress, then that's when we're saying, okay, we got something else going on here that needs some support.
Yeah, as you guys are talking, I'm just thinking out loud to myself, like I'm a lot of these things that you guys are talking about. But the other thing I want to talk about is the age consideration of athletes. And I guess when I say age consideration in athletes, I'm thinking like youth sports today compared to youth sports years ago. I think youth sports today are a lot different in certain ways. And it's like you go from youth sports to high school where it's more competitive. Then you have the high school kid that goes to college where, again, we talked about all the factors, the schedules, the training, the intense training. Now it's like college, you have the NIL, name, image, and likeness, where athletes now are making money, and it's now turned into a business. And then the college kids, if you're lucky enough, and it's a small percentage, and I tell the young athletes today, I'm like, do you guys know that there's a really small percentage of the athlete that's going to go play professional basketball? And I'm not trying to be Debbie Downer, but I'm just stating the facts that there's more to sports than, trying to say to yourself, I'm going to go play in the NBA. But you have this age and you have these different levels in mental health. As each level you move on changes, right? It gets a little bit more intense at each level.
It gets a little bit more intense at most levels. And also, like we were saying before, your body's changing and development changes. The chemistry in our brains change over time. So we know that a lot of mental health illnesses have onsets around 18 to 23. College age, along with going away from home for some people for the first time, and maybe being on a team that's very different than their high school team or their club team, and the coaches are different and the pressures are different. So there's just a lot of factors that come up together. So I think some of it is about, moving from sport to sport, and as you get older, things get more intense. But I also think that some of it's about the biology piece and where that's fitting or not fitting with these different things that are going on. And it's really important to check in around some of those things that may or may not happen. And some of them are pretty invisible to the rest of us looking at somebody too. You can't necessarily tell what they're going through. So it's important for us just to kind of be looking at, everybody in a really holistic way, and what kind of supports do they have? Who can they open up to? Who can people talk to about things, so that they don't have to hold it all in and feel like they're all by themselves and they're different than everybody else. Because actually, when you open this up, a lot of people go through mental health challenges, and I love it when somebody is willing to share with somebody else what they're going through, and they realize, oh my gosh, that person's going through this too, or they have a good friend or a family member who is also. But sometimes people hold back from talking about it so that they don't get the help that they need. So if coaches and parents can kind of open up that conversation in a way that's not judgmental, but more open to realizing how many people struggle with these different things, then we can more easily get them into the help that they might need in order to thrive and do well.
And I know as a young student athlete that, you look up to some of the professional athletes, and I know Simone Biles, the gymnast, battled this and sat out, right? I mean, what the best Olympic athlete. And then I think it was Naomi, was it Osescu, the tennis player who sat out the French Open because of mental health. And I know Michael Phelps is another guy that's battled it. And I think it's really intriguing to see over the years, we're seeing more and more athletes come out, which I think is really great. So for the young kids can see that it's okay to come out and talk about it. But what's your thoughts on some of the athletes now? We're starting to see more and more of them come out and talk about it.
I mean, I think it's huge, and it's showing that like you can operate at really high levels, and there's more going on maybe behind the scenes. And also if you have mental health stuff going on, you still can reach a high level if that's something that you want. And you can make choices around it. Like, yeah, maybe you're experiencing some sort of mind body experience, like having the twisties, and when that happens, it's unsafe for your physical and mental well-being, and taking time away and rehabbing that. Just like having some sort of physical injury that's more easily seen or tangible. I just think normalizing that is just so important. So having the athletes come out and talk about that, these pros, in such an open and vulnerable way is going to change the game and the way that people are talking about and thinking about athletes who are struggling with this.
I think one of the scary things is, even as an athlete, when you realize at some point in time your athletic career comes to an end, and it's like, what do you do? What do you do with your time after that? Because again, you're so structured as an athlete, and it's like, if you're fortunate enough to play a college sport at any level, Division 1, 2, or 3, NAIA, whatever level, it's a blessing, because you got to be good to play at any of those levels. But at some point in time, your career comes to an end. And I think for athletes to finally, I guess, face reality that time could be coming, that's also another thing for people to consider, right? When their career is done, it's like, what do you do afterwards? That took up all your time. And now it's like, you have to find time to fill some of those gaps.
Yeah. And it might be a significant part of your identity too, that you're a football player, or you're fill in the blank, a hockey player, and then all of a sudden you're not anymore, or you're an ex-football player. What's that? So like, I think the identity piece is real. I also think about the many ways, we've talked about the pressures and the things that sports may do to hurt people's mental health, but there's so many things that sports and exercise do to help people's mental health. I think activity is so important. And one of the things that we see sometimes of our seniors who have played sports throughout college, when their season comes to an end and they're like, yes, finally, I can not do as much, they actually might get really anxious or depressed, because the exercise that they were doing helped them with coping, or helped them with the different, ways that they respond to the environment and stuff like that. So I'm often warning, I think about like our swimmers, for instance, because they don't, they finish up before the end of the academic year. So our senior swimmers, and, want to make sure that they're still exercising in some way, not as intensely as they had to before, but get to the gym and make sure you don't drink too much now that you have time on your hands and stuff like that. So I think that's really important for high school athletes too. If they're going to go to college and not play a sport, can they play a club? Can they play intramural? Can they get to the gym with a friend, 4 times a week or something, just to kind of keep themselves active? Because it's not, I think some people think of at the end of the sport, they're done. But I've known a lot of people who do really well, starting to run like 5Ks, like run the fun 5Ks instead. It makes you work towards a goal. Might not be on a team, but it's a little bit different. But I think activity, just like sleep, is real important for people. It's just when you overdo it that I think it can become more problematic.
And we've talked a little bit about some of the signs of mental health, and with athletes, and we've talked about difficulty concentrating, not getting enough sleep. One of the things we used to hear all the time was just people that were just so negative. Like even in the workplace today, like you don't want to be around negative people. And I think that, again, I'm going to go back to social media, because I feel like every time you get on social media, I feel like all people are doing, they're talking negative about something, and that wears on you, right? You don't want to be around negative people. But what are some signs that you guys can share with us that we can look for?
One of the things that we try to kind of hammer home, I would say, with some of the coaches and such that we meet with, who are trying to really, they're worried, they want to keep an eye out and make sure they're checking on the athletes and aren't missing anything, is recognizing any change in what we'd say is like baseline for a person, right? My baseline is going to look totally different than Dawn's baseline is going to look on a day-to-day basis. But when you notice, I'm coming out on the field and all of a sudden I'm not talking to anybody and I'm kind of keeping to myself. And, that might be like, oh, there's something going on. So kind of checking in with some of those baseline things. I'm usually on time for things. Okay. If all of a sudden I'm showing up late for everything, Dawn's going to be like, something's up with Christy, maybe, so some of like knowing the person and getting a sense of like, okay, this is something that's deviated from their norm more than just, right, we all have off days, but on a recurrent basis or over a period of time. Sometimes that's like the initial way to just jumpstart that conversation and understand what's going on. But there's lots of other signs. I don't know, Dawn, you might have some others that come to mind.
Sure. I think that what you're saying, Christy, is the first and foremost, the most important to know where people start at. But if you see somebody's appearance change drastically, if you for substance use, if if people are reporting that they're using more than before or showing any signs of that, for sure. If somebody's skipping team meals, I think that those can all be signs. If they're certainly irritable or not even, if on your team, they're kind of part of a group of students on your team, of kids on your team, and then all of a sudden they're not hanging out with that group anymore, it might be worth just checking in, and it might be nothing. It might be like, yeah, I feel like hanging out with these people instead. Great. But to open up that conversation, I think is important, just to notice things and not be afraid to ask is the first step.
One of the things that I'm thinking of as you guys are talking, with being a high school coach, I think one of the most important things, and this is at any level, is just being there for your athletes. One of the things that I like to do is I do check-ins with my players. Hey, how you feeling? How you doing? Or, like you had mentioned, the signs where something's just off. Are you all right? I noticed, you're a little off today. But I think forming that trusting relationship with your athletes is huge. And I know, like, especially when I'm in season with my players, my poor staff, because I'm a teacher, it's like an open door and my athletes come in and out. And I always say coaching is more than, the X's and O's, the game plan on the field. Honestly, the majority of my coaching is behind closed doors and just forming those relationships with my athletes and getting to, know them and having them feel comfortable to open up to me in that safe space, because I see it all the time at the high school level. Anxiety is huge, huge. And it impacts a lot of my student athletes, from the pressures of, everybody else around them, like being the best player on the team, or so-and-so is better than me. I gotta play to their level. Or, even like you guys mentioned this earlier, parents putting so much pressure on their kids. And I know with my own daughter, I've changed a lot over the years. Back in the day, she'd get off the field and right away I was like, okay, Michaela, you needed to do this. And then I was like, oh my God, Shannon, you're being that parent. And, when she got into high school, and even now at her Division I level, I always say, all right, Michaela, I want you to focus on 3 things. I want you to go out there and talk. I want you to work hard, but most importantly, I want you to have fun. And I think that that's important. But as a coach at any level, whether it be youth sports, high school, or that collegiate level, just forming relationships with your players. And one last quick thing, my daughter is a goalie, and she played a lot as a freshman, and she ended up fracturing her wrist. So she had surgery. So for the first time, like legit in her life, she has had to kind of take a step back, and she's not really able to do a lot of, goalkeeping, practicing with her team. And I will say her coaches at Lemoyne have been amazing, like checking in with her, Michaela, how are you doing? How are you feeling? And I think that's important, just making her feel like, she's still right in it with the team. And, Michaela, don't worry, you need to rest, you need to recover, that way you'll be back ready to go. And I think that is just huge.
Yeah. I appreciate you bringing up injured student athletes, because they're a very special population, and, no one wants to be injured. And often the injured student athletes have to take more time with their sport than the others, because oftentimes they have to go to practice and watch or video or do something, and then also go to their athletic training appointments on top of that, and maybe ice and, you know, all these other things that can go along with it. And to not feel like they're still part of the team, which sometimes happens as they're kind of pushed down the bench, you know, can be really, really disheartening. So I think that what you're saying, and I'm really appreciative to the Lemoyne coaches who are making sure to continue to keep her involved, because she's an asset and she's going to heal up and she's going to be right back in there. But to keep her motivated so she wants to come back, you know, will be really important too. But yeah, we often think about our injured student athletes and, you know, concussions too. And those are the, you know, invisible injuries, and that can really hurt your intellectual cognitive abilities. And Colgate's a hard place to go to school at the same time. So it just ends up being quite a bit to juggle.
Do you guys, so as I'm sitting here thinking of injuries and stuff, this came to mind, and this is huge, Morgan's Message. Do you have, because I know like Michaela has Morgan's Message ambassadors at Lemoyne. I know that it's a popular thing in colleges. I got to throw this out there. I'm very, 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 very proud. One of my field hockey seniors, Ryan Lego, stepped up to the plate this year. And with Michelle Mellon, who's a counselor at our school, social worker, we have an ambassador program at Camden now for Morgan's Message. And Ryan, one of my players, really stepped up and, you know, was able to open up and share some of her struggles with mental health and sports and things like that. But that's such a, you know, important program. And I feel like more and more schools, whether at the high school level or at the collegiate level, are starting to bring that into their schools.
Totally. Just sharing quite literally like the message behind a lot of that, but also as like a school or an organization being able to say that like this is important to us and we believe in this, we believe in the support that's required for these sorts of things. That's what's going to help those who maybe are feeling a little bit more of that stigma or having a harder time coming forward and being able to share about it. So having those types of initiatives can have a really big impact. Absolutely.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say really quick, as I sit here listening to you ladies, I wish back in the day we did not have sports psychologists or anything like that. Yeah. And I just think that is so important. That's actually what Michaela is going to college for. Her dream job is to be a sports psychologist. But doing that and working with student athletes is just so important, because especially at that collegiate level, there is so much pressure and stress of everything. So doing what you guys do, I think, is so huge and important.
And although her being injured right now, I'm sure is so tough for her, if she's going to be a sports psychologist, coming back to being able to go through this experience is going to help her then, because she'll be able to empathize with all these students and really understand what it was like to be taken out of something that she loves for a while, and then be able to help them get back on track. So I'd like to think that there's always a silver lining to things. So maybe that's what she's going through now that can help her in the long run.
So I just wanted to bring up, and I want to I'll wrap things up. I want to get into some tips that you guys might be able to share for us for some of the athletes that struggle with mental health. But my sister made a point about, coaches. And I'll say this is, my kids are young. My son's 13 and my daughter's 8. So they're still at the young age. But I'm just thinking of coaches years ago. We always joke on my sports show is that coaches years ago were really tough. So I played for a lot of hard-nosed coaches, and I feel like now that coaches, I don't want to say the coaches have become softer, but I feel like some coaches don't push, or maybe not as hard as some of the coaches from years ago. And I think a lot of it has to do with how far do you want to push an athlete because of the mental health part of things today. So my sister was talking about coaches, and I'm just thinking, I was going to call her soft. Because she's not as hard on her daughter. I'm looking at myself. I'm not hard on my kids, and my dad was really hard, on us growing up. But is it anything to do with coaches years ago compared to coaches today? Or is it just me thinking the coaches I played for were really hard-nosed coaches?
I don't know. I'm honestly not sure. I think there's still some pretty hard coaches out there. And I honestly think that you can be tough and care at the same time. I think there's something to having like, a coach that is kind of tough on you. My son always used to say, if my coach isn't tough on me, it means he doesn't care about me. He doesn't even pay attention to
Yes.
some kids. So
Yeah.
I thought that was a great reframe when he got yelled at. So I think that there's something there that like, your coach needs to hold you to a line. There's certain expectations. And if we fear those things, I actually think that can hurt the kids in the long run. So I like to think that we can be both of those things at one time.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So tips. So for young athletes that are listening tonight, because there are a lot of schools that are going to share this, which I think is great. What are some tips that you guys can give some of those athletes to help support them?
I think the first step really is like checking in with yourself and starting to have those conversations, having the open discussions. If it's not with your coaches yet or your parents yet, but maybe it's some trusted friends or teammates, and just starting to talk about it. Sometimes even just the act of quite literally talking about the things you're experiencing can help to help you cope with it or help you get connected to the right place. And I mean, my biggest thing for coaches and programs is just having the discussions openly and starting to weave some of this stuff into, managing stress, like how to do that as an athlete. Some of these basic things, talking about mental health openly, like Shannon was sort of talking about on her team, just changing those cultures, right? They don't have to stay the way that they have been, but there might be better ways to kind of go about it.
Yeah, and be careful of any of your own judgments you might have about mental health disorders. I do love that we're talking more about mental health disorders similarly as we are physical issues, but I think if the stigma is there, then the student's going to hear that from you. So just kind of checking that out. I also think it's important to learn to listen, and it sounds way easier than it is. Way easier than it actually is. It takes a lot of energy and time to listen, which no one has enough time, it seems like, but to be able to listen instead of solve the problem. So what might work for me with a similar symptom might not work for Christy. So if I'm like, oh, Christy, just do this, or, this worked for me, this is what you have to go do, Christy might not get what she needs from me. So sometimes just to listen instead of jumping to problem solving can be really effective. And then think about what their support system is. Is there something that their parents can help them with, a sibling? Is this something that maybe a professional counselor should be helpful with? A lot of people these days will go to professional counselors for performance issues. And then as they get talking about things, they realize it's actually an anxiety disorder or a depressive disorder. So seeking out professional help when appropriate, or who else is in their social system? Is there a religious figure or a coach that they feel really comfortable with?
Yeah, I feel like the work-life balance is huge too, trying to find that balance, because again, athletes are busy, 99% of the day is filled for them. But I think trying to find that balance where they do get some time to just, get away for a little bit, to let their mind settle a little bit. So I think that's also huge too. But listen, so I'm up against the clock. I said I was only gonna go an hour. I don't want to keep you ladies anymore. But listen, I cannot thank both of you guys enough for coming on here tonight with me and spending an hour. And I hope the schools will share this and the message gets out, even a few things, a young athlete can take away. I just think this was such an important topic, and I know we could probably talk about it for hours upon hours. But is there any closing thoughts that you ladies would like to share?
I appreciate you having an episode dedicated to this issue. This has been really great. I think we could spend hours and hours talking about this. There's so much to talk about, but to open up the conversation and to spend the time doing it, knowing that you have an audience listening, just really appreciate that. And I think it could go a long way.
Agreed.
Well, I appreciate it. Like I said, Colgate's been good to me. So yes, Jan.
I got to say one quick thing. I've been trying to show my book. The ladies will appreciate this. Have you guys seen this book?
Yes.
Well, it's upside down.
Oh, definitely. Yes.
Sorry, I don't know how to make it the right way, but it's called The Anxious Generation. I started reading this book. Parents should get this book. Rock, you need this book. I'll give it to you when I'm done with it. It is so amazing. No, I've been sitting here wanting to raise it and show you guys. I know it's backwards, but that's it.
I told you she's always
Love it.
got to get the last word in with me on any podcast. But listen, thank you both. I can't thank you enough. I can't thank Colgate enough for being so good to me on doing a lot of things when I've reached out. So I appreciate everybody tonight, and it really meant a lot for you guys to come on with me. So I appreciate it.
Well, thank you both. It was nice to meet you both.
Yes,
Yeah,
Yes,
you
you
too.
too. Thank you, ladies. Thanks, Shannon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So that was really that was important, and I can't thank the ladies enough for taking the time tonight to do that with me here on the Rock Pile, and for my sister to come on as well and be part of this thing. And we could have talked for hours. I know so many people reached out to me that had people that wanted to come on, and maybe we'll do a part 2 and we'll bring some local people on as well. And again, if you are watching tonight, I'll play the playback. It'll be on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter. It'll also be up on Spotify. It'll be up on Apple Music for anybody to play the playback and listen. But hopefully you got a lot out of that. I know I did tonight as well. So I appreciate it tonight for tuning in. As I always say, the Rock Pile is where dreams become reality. Have a good evening, everybody. Thanks for tuning in tonight to the Rock Pile.